Welcome. My name's Derek Allard. I'm a web developer and instructor from Toronto and the author of a few open source CodeIgniter applications. What I want to do is share some experience with you, and today I'm going to use this video tutorial to build a moderately complex CodeIgniter app. I'm going to be building on concepts introduced in the first video tutorials from the CodeIgniter site, so if you haven't seen those yet, I'd encourage you to go watch them now. Today we're going to be building an application that will look up CodeIgniter functions. This here is the finished application. It's Ajax powered, and I'm also going to take advantage of the prototype and Scriptaculous JavaScript libraries, but we'll consider what the user experience is going to be like for users who don't have JavaScript, and we'll try and use accepted, unobtrusive techniques so that everything degrades gracefully. All the database calls are going to come from models, and we're going to cache the entire app for maximum performance, although it probably won't make too much of a difference with this since it's such a simple application. Here's the finished app. The autocomplete box works by just making a call to the database and retrieving everything that's inside of it. In this case, I've entered a bunch of CodeIgniter functions. And when I hit search, it makes an Ajax call, brings back the information out of the database, loads it beneath the search box without refreshing the page. So that's happening through the prototype library. In order to jump into the meat of this, I've built most of the application already. Before you see the code, let's take a look at the database. You'll notice I've got a table here called functions in the database I created called CI functions. And one table, three fields, an ID, name of the function, and the description. And the SQL file that built this is available in the downloads as well. Here are the actual files. I'm going to be using Dreamweaver as my editor. I've auto-loaded the URL helper and the database class, database and URL. Now the URL helper is great because it's going to give us access to base URL, site URL, index page, other really useful functions. You'll also notice that I've got my four main controllers here: about, applications, downloads, and video. Application is where most of the meat of this is going to happen. About, downloads, and videos just for extra information about how I'm doing this. And I want you to also notice that under views, I've created subfolders for each of my controllers where I store the different views inside of that. Let's take a look at the application controller. Right now, all I'm doing is passing a title into the view, and you'll notice in the application subfolder, I'm loading the view called index. Now, currently our page won't submit because it wants to submit to, oh, sorry, let me try that again. It wants to submit to the function called search. Now that function doesn't currently exist, so let's create it right now. And just to save me a bit of typing, I'm going to copy and paste. We'll change the title to CodeIgniter Search Results, and I'll pass in the search view. Now at this point it's still not functional, but at least we'll have something to look at. Do a search, and it returns my results. Now, no results are being loaded. That's because I haven't coded the model yet to grab the information out of my database. In order to build that, it's important to know that I have a text field here called function name. Okay. Let's go into our search function, and we're going to pass the function name variable, which is going to be the input post function name. I know I'm not being very creative with my names here. And what I'm going to do now is prepare a model that I can pass this into. I'm going to go to my models folder, and you can see I've already created a file here called function_model. It doesn't actually have anything in it though right now. So let's build that. We're going to use some clever trickery so that we can reuse this model, or this function at least, for both Ajax and non-Ajax calls. So I'm going to call it get search results. It's difficult to type and talk at the same time. All right. And I'm going to pass in the name of the function that we're looking for. I'm also going to pass in whether or not I'm looking for the description of that particular function. By default, I'm going to say, yes, I am interested in the description. We'll get back to that later, but that's going to be useful for our AJAX calls. I'm going to use the active record to say that I'm only interested in returning back results that have the matching function name or similar function name. I'm using like instead of where, meaning it will do wildcard matching. Let's take this information and we'll order it by, let's just do it alphabetically. Order by, put it also by function name. And we can execute this and we'll store that in a variable called query. So I'll say this database get, and we need to be specific about which table we're getting it out of. You'll remember that I name my table functions. So all of our results are now stored in this variable called query. Now we could pass this into the view or into the controller, but I don't like doing that. What I like to do is clean up all of the information first. So what I'm going to do is just do a number check, count the number of rows, and make sure that we're actually getting results back. Obviously, we don't want to try and display something if there's nothing to display. So if I count more than 0 rows, now I'm going to feed it, if I count more than 0 rows, I'm going to feed it an unordered list. I'm choosing unordered list for a very specific reason. The Scriptaculous library, for the purposes of autocomplete, expects an unordered list. So I'm going to build up my list in a variable called output, and I'll just open my list here. Whoops, I don't know what all that quoting is about. Let's get rid of those. And I'm going to close my list here. And now what I'm going to do is go through each query result. And I think I'll store it as function info. And what I'm going to do is go through each one and just enumerate it into a list item. So let's do, now remember up here we were looking for descriptions. So if the function is calling for the description, then we'll include that as part of the list item. But if not, we won't. And I'm going to code that like this. The description variable is set to true. And if that's the case, then what we'll do, and I think you know what? This is where it's returning the function as well. So what I'm going to do is make the name of the function strong. I want to make it stand out. Function info. I'm going to start by grabbing the name of the function. Close off the strong element here. And I think what I'll do then is I'll put in a line break, and beneath that, I'll put in the description. Oh, I don't need that. Here's my function info. Function underscore description. Use pretty long names, so that's a lot of typing. All right. Close off my list item. Perfect. So if they wanted descriptions, I'll give them descriptions. You'll notice that it's the function name followed by the description. If they don't want the descriptions, I'll only feed the function name. Now, the times that I only want the function name is really when I'm doing the auto-completing text field. I don't want the description of each function coming back as well, just the actual name. And here we are. So if they want the description, and we're going to assume by default they do, then we'll give it to them. But if they don't, we'll only return the name of the function. The whole thing's coming back in an unordered list. And what I'm going to do now is have this function return that when it's done running. Remember up here we also did if there's no results, or if there's more than no results. What I'm going to do now is account for times when no results are returned. And I'm just going to give them a little message that says, sorry, no results returned. Probably not the most useful of error messages, but there we are. And here's our entire model right now. Actually, this is going to be the entire model total. It's a single function called getSearchResults that's going to allow us to pass in the name of the function we're looking for, and then if we want the description or not, that's going to come back in an unordered list. Terrific. Let's save that now and go back to our application. Okay, so what I'm going to do is load this model up at the top of my controller here so that it's available to every function. Load model, and we called it function underscore model. Now we can access it by calling function model. By default, you can give it other names if you want to. But we're going to do it, finally, we're going to grab its information by saying this function model, and we called the name of the function getSearchResults. And I'm going to pass in, remember this post variable here? I'm going to pass in this variable into what we're looking for. I'm going to make this entire result, remember it's an unordered list coming back, available to the view, and I'm going to call it search results. Good. Now let's take a look at the view really quickly. Oh, this is it right here. I'm passing in the variable search results, and I'm just sticking it into a div. But at this point, when I do a search, let's do a search for Anch. Of course, remember it's like, so it'll return. This is our unordered list. I've styled it to look a little bit differently, but you'll see that, remember we did strong followed by the line break, so all the information is here. And if I do something, I'll just search for A, for example, it's going to return every function that has an A in it anywhere, because that's the nature of like. Perfect. So what I want to do now is to hijack this behavior so that rather than actually submitting to another page, it's going to take our results and load it into a box beneath our search field right here. And we're going to need JavaScript to do that. But first, what we'll do is we'll build the autocompleter. So in order to do that, I need to go back into my application controller. All of that's going to happen from JavaScript. So what I'm going to do is load an external JavaScript file using my handy dandy extra head content variable. And you'll see here I'm calling a function, I'm calling a JavaScript file called function search. Now I've actually already created that file, but it's blank. Okay. So let's get to building that up right now. Building an autocompleter using Scriptaculous is scary easy. There's an actual, oh boy, autocompleter function. Now it expects us to enter the name of the field that we're going to be grabbing information from and trying to autocomplete. Following that is the name of the div that we want to load the results into. Now I've got one there called autocomplete choices. You can see it when you view the source code. It's hidden by default. And finally, where is that information going to come from? So I'm going to use my base URL variable, which you pretty much need for every AJAX call. And I'm going to create a new function called AJAX search. And this AJAX search function doesn't exist yet, but it will shortly. Now, the problem with this as it exists is that it's going to try and load when the JavaScript file loads. The problem with that is that it's going to be looking for these fields before the page has been finished drawing, so they won't exist. So what we need to do is put all of this into an onload event. I'm going to use, I seem to be having trouble typing. I'm going to use an anonymous function. Boom, boom. I'm going to use an anonymous function to call this so that it's now going to come when the page is loaded. And remember, it's looking for the application controller in a function called AJAX search. Here we go. The AJAX search function is going to be very straightforward. It's looking for, I mentioned this earlier, Scriptaculous is looking for an unordered list, just like we're getting from our database model. There it is. And so what I'm going to do, I need to recreate the post variable function name. And this is controlled by the autocompleter. It's grabbing, we already specified which one we're looking for. And I just want my list echoed out to the screen. Now this is going to work, well I hope it's going to work, but remember that our list by default is going to return, let's just reload, is going to return all of the descriptions. All right, let's test it out. A, perfect, brings us back everything with A. Now if I do AU, it returns only the functions that have AU, and we have an autocompleter built. But I don't want all of the specific descriptions of each of the functions, so what I'm going to do is go back into this, and remember we built in our model the ability to accept another optional argument. And I'm just going to say that for this particular model, I want the description set to false. And now when I reload my page, try n this time, it returns everything with an n in it. And you'll notice we don't have the actual descriptions of the functions. Auto-completes for us, and now we can do a search for it. Brilliant! Except instead of the search taking us to another page, I want the results to come back and get loaded into a box beneath the search box. A div beneath the search box. You know what I meant. So, in order to hijack that behavior, we need to go back to our good friend JavaScript. And in addition to loading this autocompleter when the window loads, I'm also going to say, go in and grab, now I've named the actual form. I've named it function underscore search underscore form. I'm not very creative with my names. They're also kind of long and hard to type, but that's okay. And what I'm going to do is build in an onSubmit that's going to get triggered when they try and, well, submit the form. And I'm going to use another anonymous function. And I'm going to stop the form from actually being submitted by just adding a return false. So that's going to kill the form from being able to submit. And before that happens, what I'm going to have it do is run another function that I'm about to write, and I think I'll call it inline results, because that makes sense to me. I'm going to take my results and put them in line. So let's create the inline results function now. This is it. And it's going to use some more Scriptaculous effects and also the prototype library to make another AJAX call. And what I'm going to do this time, instead of doing an AJAX autocompleter, is I'm going to do an AJAX updater, which is probably the most straightforward way to update your page using AJAX. And this time, I'm going to say function description. I'll explain this in just a second here. And I'm going to go back to AJAX search. And now I need to make a couple of extra arguments into this updater to make it work, because it assumes get by default. So I need to change it to post. And then I need to specify what the body of that post is going to hold. And I'm just going to start it off by holding, whoops, sorry, I don't need that. Actually, I do need that. Description equal to true, and I'll explain that in just a second. And finally, what I'm looking for, function underscore name. And now what I'm going to do here, boy, that must be hard to see off from the corner there. Good thing you can download the code. The $f function means get the value of the form field named, and in this case, function name. Whew. Okay, maybe I'll turn on word wrap just so you can see the whole thing on the screen at one time. This is it. Okay, here's what this means. It means we're going to be running an AJAX call, and then we're going to be updating an element on our page. This argument is the name of the element we're going to be updating. I created a function description div on the view already, only I've used CSS to set its display to none, which also means I'm going to have to use JavaScript to make it visible before it loads. So in addition to actually, we'll do it with an effect. Let's do a new effect appear function description, so that after it loads our content into that, it's going to fade in, and it's going to be a very sexy effect. My color, oh, that's because I have another typo here. Forgive my typos. I need to concatenate that in properly. Let's start over. It's going to return our information into a function description. This is where the information is coming from, only it assumes get method by default, so I need to set some optional parameters here. That's what these curly braces are for. I'm setting my method to post, and then here's what's going to get passed in my post request. I'm setting my description to true explicitly, and I'm going to use this to control whether I want the description of the function visible or not. Finally, the name of the function I'm looking for. The results are going to come back, and then this div is going to fade in. The last thing we need to do is just change this so that it's actually grabbing the description that we're posting. Description. Perfect. And the beauty of this is that because we're passing it in explicitly, it will become true and it will load our description. But if we don't pass in a description a description variable in the post, or if it's explicitly set to false, then it won't load a description. So this allows us to toggle between, do we want the description for the purposes of the AJAX call, or do we not want it for the purposes of the autocompleter? I think we're ready to run. Let's go back to our page and refresh it. Okay, let's do a search for M. Brings up lots of results here. I'll do the character limiter, search, and up comes our results. Perfect. If you're looking to learn more about Scriptaculous or Prototype, I'd strongly encourage you to visit their websites. This is the Scriptaculous website. They have a wonderful documentation system. And here's the Prototype website. It's not quite as useful as Scriptaculous, but fortunately for us, Scriptaculous also keeps track of all the prototype functionality in there too. I hope that's been helpful. Remember, all of the information from this is available from video.derekallard.com. Thank you.